Hello and welcome to the Drowsy Architect. This is a channel where we tell the stories of the world's greatest buildings, slowly, gently, as bedtime stories for grown-ups. The narration is calm, the music is soft, and if you fall asleep before the end, that is exactly what we're here for. Tonight, we climb into the Andes of Peru, through cloud forest and mountain mist, to a stone city perched on a narrow ridge between two peaks, built 500 years ago by people with no iron tools and no written language, and hidden in the jungle until the modern age. Machu Picchu, a city above the clouds. Now settle in and let us begin. Imagine that you are climbing. Not quickly, not with any urgency. The path is steep and narrow and you are taking your time, one step after another, breathing slowly, letting the thin mountain air fill your lungs and then releasing it gently into the darkness. You are climbing through cloud forest, dense, green, dripping with moisture. The trees here are covered in moss and lichen and the hanging threads of Spanish moss. And in the darkness, they look like old men wrapped in gray-green cloaks, watching you pass with infinite patience. You can hear water, not a river exactly, but 1,000 tiny streams and drips and trickles, running over stone and through moss and down the trunks of trees and off the edges of leaves. The whole mountain is weeping gently. Water is everywhere. It collects on your skin. It beads on your hair. It turns the stone path beneath your feet slippery and dark. And you are climbing, step by step, higher and higher into the clouds. You are in Peru, in the Andes, on the eastern slope of the Cordillera, where the mountains drop away toward the Amazon basin, and the air is thick with humidity carried up from the jungle far below. The altitude here is more than 2,400 meters, nearly 8,000 feet. The air is thin enough to make your heart beat a little faster, a little harder, as though it is working overtime to keep you supplied with oxygen. But you keep climbing, because ahead of you, somewhere above the clouds and the forest and the darkness, there is a city. A city that was built 500 years ago, on a narrow ridge between two mountain peaks, by people who had no iron tools, no written language, no wheels, and no draft animals. A city of stone so precisely fitted that you cannot slide a knife blade between the blocks. A city of terraces and temples and fountains and staircases, perched above the clouds like a nest built by eagles. Machu Picchu. Tonight, we are going to tell its story, and it is one of the most extraordinary stories in all of architecture. Settle in, let your breathing slow, let the sounds of the mountain forest surround you, the dripping water, the distant call of a bird, the soft rustle of wind through the canopy above. We have a long way to climb, but there is no hurry. There is never any hurry here. The path turns, the forest thickens, a spider's web catches the last light of your headlamp, a perfect spiral of silk beaded with moisture, and you stop for a moment to look at it. Even here, even in the darkness, even on a rain-soaked mountainside at 8,000 feet, the world is making beautiful things, quietly, patiently, without an audience. The Inca understood this. They built their city in a place that most people would never see, hidden in the clouds, perched on a ridge that only eagles and condors could reach easily. It was not built for tourists. It was not built for fame. It was built because the mountain asked for it, because the stone and the water and the light were right, because something in this particular place, at this particular altitude, between these particular peaks, demanded to be shaped into rooms and terraces and staircases and temples. And so it was, and so it endures. Let us begin. To understand Machu Picchu, you must first understand the world that created it, and that means understanding the Inca. The word itself is a title, Inca. It means ruler or lord or king. It was the title given to the supreme ruler of the empire, and by extension it came to refer to his people, his civilization, his entire world. The Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, the four quarters of the world. That was what they called it, and for a brief and brilliant period of perhaps 100 years. It was the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. Imagine the scale. The Inca Empire at its greatest extent stretched more than 4,000 kilometers along the western coast of South America, from the southern border of what is now Colombia, through Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and down into Chile and Argentina. It encompassed desert coastline and mountain passes and tropical jungle and high grassland. It included peoples who spoke dozens of different languages. It was held together not by a written language, not by a shared religion in the conventional sense, but by an extraordinary system of roads, of reciprocal labor obligations, of oral record keeping using knotted strings called quipus, and by the absolute authority of the Inca himself. The capital was Cusco, a city at 3,400 meters altitude, in a valley surrounded by mountains, in what is now southeastern Peru. Cusco was the navel of the world, the sacred center. All roads led to Cusco, and all roads led from Cusco, radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel to the four quarters of the empire. The Inca believed they were children of the sun. Inti, the sun god, was the supreme deity, and the Inca himself, the ruler, was the son of the sun. His authority was absolute, his word was law, his body was sacred. When he traveled, he was carried on a litter borne by specially chosen porters. When he ate, servants held cloths beneath his chin to catch any crumbs that might fall, because the body of the Inca was too sacred to be soiled. When he died, his body was mummified and kept in his palace, where servants continued to attend him, to bring him food and drink, to carry him through the streets on festival days, as though he was still alive. This may sound strange, but it tells you something important about the Inca world. Time was not linear in the way we understand it. The past was not past. The ancestors were not gone. They were present, watching, participating in the life of the community. The boundary between the living and the dead was thin, porous, more like a veil than a wall. Remember this. It matters for understanding Machu Picchu. The geography of the Inca world is extreme. The Andes are the longest mountain chain on Earth, stretching 7,000 kilometers along the western edge of South America like a spine of stone. They rise from sea level to peaks above 6,000 meters in the space of 100 kilometers. The temperature drops roughly 6 degrees for every 1,000 meters of altitude gained. At sea level on the coast, the air is warm and dry, the Atacama Desert stretching into the haze. At 3,000 meters, the air is cool and thin, and the sky is a deep cobalt blue. At 4,000 meters, you are in the Puna, the high grassland, where the air is so thin that your body struggles to function and the nights are bitter cold. The Inca had a word for the different altitude zones. They called the coastal desert Yunga, the temperate valleys Quechua, the high grasslands Puna. The snow-capped peaks were the realm of the mountain spirits, the Apis, and ordinary people did not go there unless they were making offerings. Machu Picchu sits in the Quechua zone, but just barely. It is on the eastern slope of the Andes, where the mountains drop away toward the Amazon basin. The air here is warmer and more humid than in the high valleys to the west. Cloud forest clings to the slopes, a dense tangle of trees and ferns and orchids and bromeliads, dripping with moisture carried up from the jungle below. The Urubamba River, which curves around the base of the Machu Picchu ridge, flows east toward the Amazon. It is one of the many tributaries that feed the greatest river system on Earth. The Inca called it Wilcanuta, the House of the Sun. The valley it carves through the mountains, the Sacred Valley, was the agricultural heartland of the empire, rich in maize and potatoes and coca. The empire did not always exist. It grew from small beginnings. The early Inca were one tribe among many in the Cusco Valley, competing with neighboring groups for land and water and prestige. The origin story that the Inca told about themselves involved a cave called Tamputioco, the window of origin from which the first Inca ancestors emerged. There were 4 brothers and 4 sisters. They wandered through the highlands until one of them, Manco Capac, drove a golden staff into the earth at Cusco, and it sank in easily, telling him that the soil was rich and that this was the place to settle. Like all origin stories, this one is a mixture of myth and meaning. The important thing is what it tells us about how the Inca saw themselves. They were chosen, they were guided by the gods. The land was given to them, and Cusco was their sacred center. For several centuries, the Inca remained a relatively small and local power. They fought with their neighbors, they formed alliances, they grew slowly. The archaeological record is thin for these early centuries, and much of what we know comes from oral traditions recorded by Spanish chroniclers after the conquest. But it is clear that something changed dramatically in the early 15th century. Something that transformed the Inca from a regional chiefdom into an empire that would eventually stretch across most of Western South America. That something was a man named Yupanqui. He would later take the name Pachacuti, and he is the key to our story. Pachacuti, the name means Earthshaker, or more precisely, he who remakes the world. It was a name he chose for himself, and it was not an exaggeration. The story goes like this. Around the year 1438, the Inca were facing an existential threat. A powerful neighboring people called the Chancas were marching on Cusco with a large army. The reigning Inca, Viracocha Inca, lost his nerve. He fled the city with his chosen heir, Inca Urco, abandoning Cusco to its fate. But Yupanqui did not flee. He was a younger son, not the chosen heir, and perhaps he had less to lose, or perhaps he simply had more courage. He rallied the defenders of Cusco. He called on the gods for help, and according to the legend, the very stones of the battlefield rose up and became warriors, fighting alongside the Inca against the Chancas. The Chancas were defeated. Yupanqui was victorious, and everything changed. Deposed his father, he set aside his brother. He took the name Pachacuti the Earthshaker, and he began to remake the world in truth. Over the next 3 decades, he would transform every aspect of Inca society. He redesigned Cusco, rebuilding it in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal. He established the system of royal estates that would define Inca governance. He expanded the road network. He created the administrative structures that would allow the empire to function. He conquered neighboring peoples and incorporated them into the growing Inca state. And he built more than any Inca before him. He built the great Temple of the Sun in Cusco, Coricancha, whose walls were said to be lined with sheets of gold. He built fortresses and storehouses and way stations along the expanding road network. He built royal estates in the valleys around Cusco, places where the Inca could retreat from the capital and oversee his lands. And sometime around 1450, give or take a decade, he built Machu Picchu. Before we climb to the city itself, let us consider Pachacuti's other great building project, Cusco. When Pachacuti took power, Cusco was a modest settlement. He transformed it into an imperial capital. According to tradition, he personally designed the new city, laying it out in the shape of a puma. The head of the puma was the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, whose massive zigzag walls of precisely fitted megaliths still stand on the hill above the city. The body of the puma was the grid of streets and plazas below. The tail was the junction of the two rivers that flow through the valley. Sacsayhuaman is staggering. The walls are built of limestone blocks that weigh up to 125 tons each. They are fitted together without mortar, and the fit is so precise that the joints are almost invisible. Some of the blocks have dozens of faces and angles, each one precisely shaped to interlock with its neighbors. How the Inca moved and placed blocks of this size remains a subject of intense scholarly debate. They had no wheels. They had no pulleys in the European sense. They had no iron tools, and yet they cut and moved and placed stones the size of houses with a precision that modern engineers find difficult to replicate. The technique probably involved a combination of ramps, wooden rollers, braided rope, and enormous numbers of workers, but the details are uncertain. The Inca left no written instructions. The Spanish chroniclers who saw Sacsayhuaman shortly after the conquest described it as the work of demons because they could not imagine how human beings could have built it. Pachacuti also built Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, in the heart of Cusco. This was the most sacred building in the empire. Its walls were said to be lined with sheets of gold. Inside were golden idols representing the sun, the moon, the stars, thunder, and the rainbow. A garden of gold and silver surrounded the temple, with life-sized replicas of maize plants and llamas and birds, all made of precious metal. The Spanish melted it all down. It was this builder, this visionary, this earthshaker, who conceived of Machu Picchu. Why here? Why this particular ridge between two peaks in the cloud forest above the Urubamba River? It is a question that scholars have debated for more than a century, and the answer reveals something important about how the Inca understood their relationship with the landscape. The Inca did not see mountains as obstacles. They saw them as beings, sacred beings. The mountains were apis, spirits, gods, ancestors frozen in stone. Each mountain had a personality, each mountain had power, and the relationship between the Inca and the mountains was one of reciprocity, of mutual obligation, of respect. Machu Picchu sits between two mountains. Machu Picchu itself, the old peak, rises to the south. Huayna Picchu, the young peak, rises to the north. Between them, a narrow saddle of land, a ridge barely 300 meters wide at its broadest point, drops away steeply on both sides to the Urubamba River far below. The river curves around three sides of the ridge in a tight horseshoe bend, creating a natural moat of rushing water 2,000 feet below the city. The location is extraordinary. In every direction, mountains rise and fall and rise again, their peaks often hidden in cloud, their lower slopes thick with forest. The air is warm and humid, carried up from the jungle to the east. Rain falls frequently, mist drifts through the valleys like smoke, and sometimes, early in the morning, the clouds settle below the ridge and the city appears to float above them, a stone island in a white sea. The Inca chose this place because it was sacred. The mountains spoke to them, the river spoke to them, the relationship between earth and sky, between mountain and cloud, between stone and water, was exactly right. This was a place where the boundaries between the human world and the spirit world were thin, a place of power. And there were practical reasons too. The site was relatively close to Cusco, about 80 kilometers to the northwest, connected by a road that climbed through mountain passes and descended into the Urubamba Valley. It was defensible, perched on its narrow ridge with steep drops on all sides. It was well watered, with springs and streams that could be channeled through the city, and the surrounding slopes, though steep, could be terraced for agriculture. The building of Machu Picchu was an act of extraordinary ambition. Remember the conditions. There is no flat ground. The ridge is narrow and uneven and tilted. Granite bedrock lies close to the surface or breaks through the surface in massive outcrops. The slopes fall away steeply on all sides. Water runs everywhere during the rainy season. Landslides are a constant threat. And yet the Inca built a city here, a city of approximately 200 structures, covering about 5 hectares, with agricultural terraces adding another 5 hectares, a city with a sophisticated drainage system, with fountains and water channels, with temples and palaces and workshops and storerooms and residential quarters, a city designed with such precision and beauty that it takes your breath away even today, 500 years after it was abandoned. How did they do it? The answer begins with stone. The Inca were master stonemasons, perhaps the greatest the world has ever known, and they achieved their mastery without iron or steel, using only tools made of harder stone, bronze chisels, sand as an abrasive, water, and infinite patience. The granite at Machu Picchu was quarried on site. There is a quarry area in the center of the city where you can still see blocks that were partially cut but never finished, abandoned mid-work, as though the masons had simply set down their tools and walked away. The quarry tells us how they worked. They identified natural fracture lines in the rock. They drove wooden wedges into cracks and soaked them with water so that the wood expanded and split the stone. They roughed out blocks and then shaped them using hammer stones, heavy rounded cobbles of harder rock that were used to pound the granite into shape. The precision is astonishing. In the finest buildings at Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Sun, the principal temple, the Temple of the Three Windows, the stones are fitted together so perfectly that you cannot insert the thin blade of a knife between them. No mortar was used. The stones hold together through their own weight and the precision of their fit. This technique is called ashlar masonry, and the Inca version of it is among the finest ever achieved anywhere in the world. Each stone was individually shaped to fit its neighbors. There are no standard block sizes. No two stones are the same. The joints are irregular, curved, interlocking. Some stones have as many as 12 or 14 angles, and each angle fits perfectly against the adjacent stone. The effect is both organic and precise, like a puzzle assembled by someone with infinite patience and an absolute commitment to perfection. But masonry is only part of the story. The real genius of Machu Picchu lies in its engineering, and specifically in its management of water. Water is both the lifeblood and the greatest enemy of any settlement at altitude in the Andes. The rainy season, from October to April, brings heavy precipitation. At Machu Picchu, annual rainfall averages nearly 2,000 millimeters. That is more than London receives in 3 years. All of that water falls on a steep, narrow ridge of fractured granite, and if it is not controlled, it will destroy everything. The Inca understood this, and they designed Machu Picchu from the very beginning with water management as a central concern. In fact, scholars now believe that the drainage system was the first thing built, before any of the buildings, before the temples, before the terraces. The engineers laid out the drainage infrastructure first and then built the city on top of it. The system works like this. Beneath the visible surface of the city, beneath the plazas and the buildings and the terraces, there is a layer of carefully placed stones and gravel. This layer acts as a drain, allowing water to percolate down through the soil without building up pressure. Below this drainage layer, channels cut into the bedrock direct water away from the foundations and out through the retaining walls of the terraces, where it emerges as small streams that run down the mountain. The agricultural terraces themselves are engineering marvels. From the surface, they look like simple stone walls holding back flat platforms of soil, but beneath the surface, each terrace contains distinct layers. At the bottom, large rocks for drainage, above that, smaller stones and gravel, above that, sand, and finally, on top, a layer of rich topsoil. This layered construction ensures that water drains through the terraces without washing away the soil, and that the roots of crops have access to both moisture and nutrients. Some scholars estimate that 60% of the construction effort at Machu Picchu went into foundations, drainage, and terracing that is invisible from the surface. The city you see today, the beautiful stone buildings and plazas and staircases, represents only 40% of the total work. The water supply came from a spring on the north slope of Machu Picchu mountain, about 700 meters uphill from the city. The Inca built a canal, partly cut into the rock and partly built of carefully fitted stone, that carried water from this spring down to the city. The canal is about 740 meters long and has a carefully calculated gradient, steep enough to keep the water flowing, but gentle enough to prevent erosion. The water enters the city at its highest point and flows downhill through a series of 16 fountains. These are not decorative fountains in the European sense. They are functional water outlets, each one a small stone channel that drops water into a basin from which it flows to the next fountain below. The fountains are arranged in a line down the slope, and the first and most elaborate fountain is located next to the residence believed to have been Pachacuti's own dwelling. The Inca got first use of the freshest water. After that, the water flowed to the temple precinct, then to the residential areas, then to the lower levels of the city. The symbolism is clear. Water flows from sacred source to sacred ruler to sacred temple to the people. The hierarchy of the empire is expressed in the flow of water. Some of these fountains still work. 500 years after they were built, water still flows through the stone channels and drops into the carved basins. The engineering is so sound, the gradients so carefully calculated, the stonework so precisely fitted, that the system continues to function with no maintenance whatsoever. Think about that. Think about the plumbing in your own home and how often it requires repair. The Inca water system at Machu Picchu has been running for 5 centuries without a plumber. Modern hydraulic engineers have studied the fountain system in detail. They have measured the flow rates and the channel gradients and the basin volumes. Their conclusion is that the system was designed by someone who understood fluid dynamics at an intuitive level, someone who knew exactly how water behaves when it flows through channels of different widths and depths and gradients. The channels are sized to carry the expected flow without overtopping. The drops between fountains are designed to create a pleasing visual effect and a soothing sound without splashing water outside the basin. The whole system is elegant in the original sense of the word. It achieves its purpose with the minimum of means and the maximum of grace. The sound of the fountains is part of the experience of Machu Picchu. Even today, if you stand near the Fountain Cascade and close your eyes, you can hear the water dropping from basin to basin, each fountain a slightly different pitch, creating a gentle descending melody that the Inca heard every day of their lives here. It is a sound designed into the architecture. The Inca were not just engineers, they were composers of water. Now let us walk through the city itself, slowly, in the darkness, with the stars above and the clouds below and the mountains standing watch on all sides. Machu Picchu is divided into two main areas by a large central plaza. To the south and west, the agricultural sector, with its dramatic step terraces falling away down the mountainside. To the north and east, the urban sector, with its temples and residences and workshops. A wide grassy esplanade, the central plaza, separates the two areas and provides the main open space in the city. We enter from the south through the main gate. The Inca Gate is a trapezoidal doorway, narrower at the top than at the bottom, a shape that is characteristic of Inca architecture and that serves a structural purpose. The trapezoidal shape is more resistant to earthquake forces than a rectangular opening, and earthquakes are common here. The Andes are one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. The Inca knew this. Their buildings were designed to flex and settle rather than crack and collapse. The walls lean slightly inward. The stones are fitted without mortar, so they can shift slightly during tremors and then resettle. Many Inca buildings have survived earthquakes that destroyed later Spanish colonial structures built on top of them. Through the gate, we cross the agricultural terraces on a stone stairway. The terraces are vast. They step down the western slope of the ridge in a series of wide platforms, each one held in place by a retaining wall of carefully fitted stone. In Inca times, these terraces grew maize and potatoes and other crops, feeding the city's population and providing surplus for storage. How many people lived here? The estimates vary. Most scholars now believe the permanent population was somewhere between 300 and 1,000 people, with larger numbers during festivals and ceremonial occasions when the Inca and his court would have visited. Machu Picchu was not a city in the modern sense. It was a royal estate, a place where the Inca came to rest, to perform ceremonies, to oversee his lands, to commune with the mountain spirits. The permanent residents were the caretakers, the farmers, the priests, the craftspeople who maintained the estate and kept it ready for the Inca's arrival. The sacred district is the heart of the city, and its centerpiece is the Intihuatana Stone. Intihuatana, the word means the hitching post of the sun. It is a carved granite pillar, roughly shaped like a short, thick post that rises from a carved base on the highest point of a natural rock outcrop. The pillar is about 36 centimeters tall, and its four sides face roughly toward the four cardinal directions. The Intihuatana is an astronomical instrument. At the equinoxes, when the sun passes directly overhead, the pillar casts no shadow at midday. The Inca tracked the movements of the sun throughout the year using this stone, marking the solstices and equinoxes and the turning points of the agricultural calendar. In a civilization without written records, such instruments were vital. They told you when to plant, when to harvest, when the rains would come, when the dry season would begin. But the Intihuatana was more than a calendar. It was a sacred object. The name itself, the hitching post of the sun, suggests that the Inca believed the stone had the power to hold the sun in place, to prevent it from falling too far toward the horizon during the winter months and disappearing altogether. The sun was life. The sun was the supreme god, and the Intihuatana was the anchor that kept it tied to the earth. The Spanish understood this. When they conquered the Inca Empire, they systematically destroyed every Intihuatana stone they could find. They understood that these stones were the physical embodiment of Inca religious power, and they broke them as a way of breaking the religion. The Intihuatana at Machu Picchu survives only because the Spanish never found Machu Picchu. It is one of the few intact examples in all of Peru. Near the Intihuatana, the Temple of the Three Windows looks out over the central plaza toward the eastern mountains. Three large trapezoidal windows pierce the eastern wall, and through them, on clear mornings, you can see the sun rise over the peaks. The temple is built of massive stones fitted together with extraordinary precision. The stonework here is among the finest at Machu Picchu. The window frames are carved from single blocks of granite, and the fit between adjacent blocks is so tight that the joints seem to disappear when you look at them from a slight distance. The three windows may refer to the origin myth of the Inca, the three windows of Tampu Tioco, the cave from which the first ancestors emerged. If so, this temple is a recreation of the origin place, a physical embodiment of the creation story, built in stone on a mountaintop above the clouds. Below the Temple of the Three Windows, the principal temple faces north across a small open space. This is the largest and most finely built temple at Machu Picchu. Its three walls are built of enormous blocks, precisely fitted, and the fourth side is open to the plaza. Behind the temple, a smaller room called the sacristy or the ornament chamber has some of the most elaborate stonework in the entire city. The niches and projections in the walls were designed to hold sacred objects. Perhaps golden idols or textiles or other ritual items that have long since vanished. The Temple of the Sun is perhaps the most remarkable building at Machu Picchu. It is built on top of a natural granite boulder, and its curved wall follows the contour of the rock beneath it, creating a semicircular tower that is unique in Inca architecture. The wall leans inward slightly and is built of exceptionally fine ashlar masonry. A window in the eastern wall is aligned so that during the winter solstice, the first rays of the rising sun enter through the window and fall on a carved stone inside the temple. Beneath the Temple of the Sun, there is a cave. The natural space beneath the boulder has been shaped and finished with fine stonework, creating a chamber that scholars call the Royal Tomb. Whether anyone was actually buried here is unclear. No human remains have been found, but the quality of the stonework and the relationship with the temple above suggest that this was a sacred space of great importance. The Inca relationship with rock was different from our own. We think of rock as raw material, something to be quarried and shaped and moved and stacked. The Inca saw rock as living. The great outcrops of granite that break through the surface at Machu Picchu were not obstacles to be removed. They were sacred presences to be honored. The Inca built around them, incorporated them into their buildings, carved them into shapes that enhanced their natural forms. You can see this throughout the city, a stairway carved directly into a natural rock outcrop, a building wall that incorporates a massive boulder, the stone left in its natural shape, while the masonry fits around it with watchmaker's precision. A flat-topped rock carved into a miniature representation of the surrounding mountains, a sacred landscape model that mirrors the peaks visible from the city. This is what makes Machu Picchu feel so different from other ancient cities. It does not sit on the landscape, it grows from it. The buildings emerge from the bedrock like natural features, as though the mountain itself decided to organize itself into rooms and terraces and staircases. At the northern end of the city, beyond the sacred district, there is a large flat stone set upright against a low wall. This is the sacred rock. It is roughly the same shape as the mountain behind it. Pumacillo, the puma's claw, as seen from the city, the Inca placed it here deliberately. The stone mirrors the mountain. The mountain mirrors the stone. The boundary between the built and the natural dissolves. The sacred rock is not carved in the European sense. It is not a sculpture representing something. It is, in the Inca understanding, the mountain itself, brought into the city, made accessible, made present. You could stand before the sacred rock and commune with the mountain spirit without climbing the mountain. The stone was the mountain. The map was the territory. Nearby, in the lower part of the urban sector, there is another remarkable feature. A natural rock outcrop has been carved into the shape of a condor. The head and ruff of the bird lie flat on the ground, carved from a protruding piece of bedrock. The wings are formed by two enormous natural boulders that lean in from either side, creating a triangular space beneath them. This is the temple of the condor. The condor was sacred to the Inca. It was the messenger of the upper world, the world of the gods and the sky and the sun. The puma represented the middle world, the world of the living. The serpent represented the lower world, the world of the dead and the underground rivers. These three animals formed a trinity at the heart of Inca cosmology, and all three are represented at Machu Picchu. The space beneath the condor's wings may have been used for ceremonial purposes. Some scholars have suggested it was a place of sacrifice or a prison. Others believe it was an oracle, a place where priests communed with the spirit of the condor and received messages from the upper world. The truth is uncertain, but the power of the space is undeniable. Standing beneath those massive leaning boulders, with the carved condor at your feet, you feel enclosed and exposed at the same time. The sky is visible above. The stone presses in from the sides, and the condor, spread flat on the ground, seems about to rise. The residential sector of the city lies to the east, stepping down the slope in a series of compounds. The houses are smaller and simpler than the temples, with rougher stonework and thatched roofs supported on wooden beams. Each compound typically contains a group of buildings arranged around a small courtyard, creating a private family space. The roofs have long since vanished. The wooden beams rotted away centuries ago, and the thatched grass roofs blew away on the mountain wind. But the stone walls stand, and the anchor points for the roof beams are still visible, small protrusions in the stonework where the wooden rafters once rested. The houses had few furnishings. The Inca slept on the floor, on mats woven from grasses or cloth. They cooked in stone hearths. They stored food and tools in niches built into the walls. Life was simple and functional, but not uncomfortable. The thick stone walls provided insulation against the mountain chill. The thatched roofs were waterproof and well ventilated, and the views from almost every house in the city were spectacular. Imagine waking up in one of these houses. It is still dark. The air is cool. The mountain chill has crept through the doorway during the night. You pull your woven blanket a little tighter and listen. Water trickling somewhere, a bird calling. the distant roar of the Urubamba River far below. The stones of the walls around you are cold to the touch, but they hold the memory of yesterday's sun, and soon, when the morning light reaches the ridge, they will begin to warm again. Food came from the terraces and from the surrounding valleys. The agricultural terraces at Machu Picchu were productive but limited. The site is too high and the ridge too narrow for large-scale farming. Much of the food consumed at the estate would have been brought in from the Urubamba Valley below, carried up the steep paths on the backs of llamas or human porters. The staples were potatoes and maize. Peru is the homeland of the potato, and the Inca cultivated hundreds of varieties, each adapted to different altitudes and conditions. At Machu Picchu's elevation, only certain cold-tolerant varieties would grow on the terraces. Maize, which prefers warmer conditions, was more likely grown in the valley below and brought up. The Inca also grew quinoa, a high-protein grain that thrives at altitude, and they cultivated coca, the leaves of a small shrub that were chewed as a mild stimulant and suppressant of hunger and fatigue. Coca was sacred to the Inca. It was used in religious ceremonies and as a medium of exchange. The eastern slopes below Machu Picchu, warm and humid and facing the jungle, were ideal for coca cultivation. The llama was the only large domestic animal, smaller than a horse, but sturdy and sure-footed. The llama could carry loads of up to about 30 kilograms along the mountain trails. Llamas also provided wool and meat, though alpacas, the llama's smaller cousin, were preferred for their finer wool. Both animals are camelids, distant relatives of the camels of the Old World, and they are perfectly adapted to life at high altitude. The road that connected Machu Picchu to Cusco was part of the Inca road system, one of the great engineering achievements of the pre-Columbian world. The Inca road network, called the Huayna, the Great Road, extended for approximately 30,000 kilometers across the empire. It climbed mountain passes above 5,000 meters. It crossed deserts and swamps and tropical forests. It spanned rivers on suspension bridges woven from plant fibers. It was the backbone of the empire, carrying messengers and armies and trade goods and administrative orders from one end of Tawantinsuyu to the other. The road to Machu Picchu descended from the high passes into the Urubamba Valley and then climbed again to the ridge. Parts of the original road survive, and they are extraordinary. Stone steps cut into the mountainside, drainage channels, retaining walls, tunnels cut through rock. In places, the road is barely a meter wide, carved into a cliff face with a drop of hundreds of meters on one side. The most dramatic surviving section is the approach to the Sun Gate. In Tipunku, the ceremonial entrance to Machu Picchu from the Inca Trail. The path climbs through a notch in the mountain ridge, and then, suddenly, the entire city appears below you, spread across the saddle between the two peaks, with the Urubamba River winding through the valley far below and the mountains rising on all sides. This view, the view from the Sun Gate, is one of the most famous in the world, and it is not accidental. The Inca designed the approach to create exactly this moment of revelation. You climb for hours through cloud forest, seeing nothing but trees and mist and stone, and then, in a single step, the forest opens and the city appears, floating above the clouds like a vision from a dream. The Inca Trail was not just a road, it was a pilgrimage route, and the experience of walking it was carefully choreographed by the Inca architects who designed it. The trail passes through several way stations and secondary sites before reaching Machu Picchu, each one offering a different view, a different sacred landscape, a different encounter with the mountain spirits. At Huayna, the forever young, the trail passes a complex of terraces and buildings clinging to a steep mountainside. At Huayna, the town above the clouds, it crosses a ridge where the views stretch for miles in every direction. Each site prepares the traveler for the next, building anticipation, creating a sense of journey and arrival that culminates in the stunning view from the Sun Gate. Modern hikers who walk the Inca Trail experience something of this original intention, though they carry modern backpacks and sleep in modern tents and drink coffee from metal cups. The landscape is the same, the stone path is the same, and the moment of arrival, when Machu Picchu appears from the mist below the Sun Gate, still has the power to silence a crowd of hikers who have spent 4 days complaining about blisters and altitude sickness. The 4-day trek covers approximately 43 kilometers and crosses 2 mountain passes above 4,000 meters. The highest point, Huayna, Dead Woman's Pass, reaches 4,215 meters. The air at this altitude is thin enough to make even fit hikers gasp. The temperature can drop below freezing at night. And the trail surface ranges from well-preserved Inca stone steps to muddy jungle paths to vertiginous cliff-edge traverses, where a misplaced foot would mean a fall of hundreds of meters. But the difficulty is part of the design. The Inca understood that arrival means more when the journey is hard. A sacred place reached easily is diminished by the ease of reaching it. A sacred place reached after days of effort, of cold and fatigue, and shortness of breath and aching legs, is transformed by the suffering that precedes it. The pilgrim arrives exhausted and open. The defenses of the rational mind have been worn down by altitude and effort. The city appears not as a collection of old stones, but as a revelation. This is still true today. The hikers who arrive at the Sun Gate after 4 days on the trail have a different experience from the tourists who ride the bus up from Aguas Calientes. Both see the same ruins, but the hikers have earned their view. They have walked the same path the Inca walked. They have slept in the same mountains. They have breathed the same thin air. And when the city appears below them in the dawn light, floating on its cloud sea, the feeling that rises in them is not tourism. It is something closer to worship. Machu Picchu was not the only royal estate in the region. Pachacuti built several, strung along the sacred valley of the Urubamba like jewels on a necklace. Ollantaytambo, with its massive terraces and unfinished temple of pink granite, still serves as a living town, its inhabitants occupying buildings whose lower walls are pure Inca masonry. Pisac, perched above the valley on a hilltop, has agricultural terraces and a cemetery with thousands of graves cut into the cliff face. Each estate had its own character, its own relationship with the landscape, its own sacred purpose. But Machu Picchu was the most remote, the most dramatic, and the most perfectly integrated with its mountain setting. The Inca road system deserves more attention. It was one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world, comparable to the Roman roads in its ambition and far more varied in its challenges. The main north-south highway, the Huayna, ran along the spine of the Andes from Quito in Ecuador to Santiago in Chile. A parallel coastal road ran along the desert lowlands, and hundreds of connecting roads linked the two main highways and provided access to the most remote corners of the empire. The roads crossed every type of terrain imaginable. In the highlands, they were paved with flat stones and bordered by low walls. In the desert, they were marked by lines of rocks across the sand. In the jungle, They were raised causeways above the swampy ground. Where they crossed rivers, the Inca built bridges. The suspension bridges were marvels of organic engineering, made entirely from braided plant fibers, mainly a tough local grass called iku. They could span gaps of up to 50 meters. The cables were as thick as a man's body and were anchored to stone abutments on each side. The deck was made of woven mats laid across the cables. The bridges swayed and bounced when you walked across them, and they required constant maintenance, but they worked. Some were in continuous use for more than 500 years. Along the roads at regular intervals, the Inca built tambos, way stations that provided shelter and food for travelers, and a network of relay runners called chasquis carried messages along the roads at extraordinary speed. Each runner would sprint a section of perhaps 2 kilometers and then pass the message to the next runner, who was waiting at a relay station. In this way, messages could travel from Cusco to Quito, a distance of nearly 2,000 kilometers, in about 5 days. Faster than a horse could cover the same distance. The roads were the nervous system of the empire. Without them, the Inca could not have governed a territory of 4,000 kilometers in length, and without them, Machu Picchu would have been unreachable. The Inca had no written language. This seems impossible. How do you run an empire of 12 million people across 4,000 kilometers of mountains without being able to write things down? The answer is the Quipu. A quipu is a recording device made of knotted strings. A main cord, usually made of cotton or llama wool, hangs vertically. From it dangle dozens or sometimes hundreds of pendant strings, each one a different color, each one bearing a series of knots tied at different positions along its length. The knots encode numbers. A knot in one position represents units. A knot higher up represents tens, higher still, hundreds, higher still, thousands. The system is decimal, base 10, just like our own number system. And by varying the colors and positions of the strings, the Quipu the keeper of the Quipus, could record census data, tax obligations, agricultural yields, military deployments, and the contents of storehouses. At least that is the numerical interpretation. Some scholars believe that Quipus also recorded narrative information, stories, histories, perhaps even poetry. The Spanish chronicler José de Acosta wrote that the Quipucamyocs could record anything that books could record, and that they could produce Quipu versions of prayers and catechisms when the Spanish missionaries demanded it. If this is true, then the Quipu is not merely a calculator, it is a library made of string. We do not fully understand the Quipu system. Most Quipus were destroyed during the colonial period, and the art of reading them died with the last trained Quipucamyocs. About 900 Quipus survive in museums around the world, and researchers are still trying to decode them. Some progress has been made with the numerical aspects, but the narrative dimensions, if they exist, remain largely mysterious. At Machu Picchu, the administrative buildings would have contained Quipus. The stewards who managed the royal estate would have recorded the contents of every storeroom, the yield of every terrace, the number of workers, the amount of chicha brewed for festivals. These records are gone now. The strings rotted in the jungle humidity centuries ago, but the system they represented, a way of managing an empire without a single written word, is one of the most remarkable intellectual achievements of the ancient world. The Inca Empire lasted barely 100 years. This is one of the most remarkable facts about it. In the span of 3 or 4 generations, the Inca went from a regional chiefdom to the largest empire in the Americas. and then vanished. The end came with terrifying speed. In 1532, a Spanish expedition led by Francisco Pizarro arrived in northern Peru. Pizarro was not a nobleman. He was the illegitimate son of a soldier from Extremadura, a harsh, dry region of western Spain that produced a disproportionate number of conquistadors. He could not read or write. He had spent years in the swamps of Panama and the coasts of Colombia, hardened by malaria and violence and failure. He had tried twice before to reach Peru and had been turned back by disease and hostile seas, but on his third attempt, he succeeded. He had fewer than 200 men, including about 60 horsemen. Against them stood an empire of perhaps 12 million people with an army of tens of thousands. The odds were absurd, and yet, the empire was already weakened. A devastating epidemic, probably smallpox, had swept through the Andes several years before the Spanish arrived. The disease had traveled faster than the Europeans themselves, spreading along the Inca road network from the north, killing the Inca ruler Huayna Picchu and his chosen heir in rapid succession. The result was a civil war between two surviving sons, Atahualpa in the north and Huascar in the south. That divided the empire and exhausted its armies. Pizarro arrived at exactly the worst possible moment for the Inca and the best possible moment for himself. He marched inland to the city of Cajamarca in the northern highlands, where Atahualpa was encamped with an army of perhaps 40,000 soldiers. Pizarro had 168 men. What happened next was one of the most audacious acts of treachery in military history. Pizarro sent a message inviting Atahualpa to a meeting in the main square of Cajamarca. Atahualpa agreed. He entered the square carried on a golden litter by 80 lords of the realm, surrounded by thousands of unarmed retainers. He was confident. Why should he fear a handful of strangers? A Spanish friar approached Atahualpa and offered him a Bible, or by some accounts a breviary. Atahualpa, who had never seen a book, held it to his ear, listened, and when it did not speak to him, threw it on the ground. The friar screamed blasphemy. Pizarro gave the signal. Hidden cannons fired into the packed square. Cavalry charged from concealed positions. Spanish soldiers with steel swords and armor waded into a crowd of unarmed people. The massacre lasted perhaps 30 minutes. Thousands of Inca were killed. Not a single Spaniard died. Atahualpa was pulled from his litter and taken prisoner. What followed was the famous ransom. Atahualpa offered to fill a room once with gold and twice with silver in exchange for his freedom. Pizarro agreed. For months, gold and silver flowed into Cajamarca from every corner of the empire. Temples were stripped. Sacred objects were melted down. The Golden Garden of Coricancha in Cusco was destroyed. The total ransom amounted to approximately 6 tons of gold and 12 tons of silver. Pizarro took the treasure, and then he executed Atahualpa anyway, garroting him in the square at Cajamarca in July of 1533. He had promised to burn Atahualpa alive and offered the garrote as mercy if Atahualpa agreed to be baptized. Atahualpa accepted baptism and was strangled rather than burned. The last effective ruler of the Inca Empire died with a Christian name, Francisco, the same name as the man who killed him. Within a few years, the Spanish had occupied Cusco and installed a puppet Inca ruler. Within a generation, the empire was gone. But the conquest was not clean or simple. There were rebellions. In 1536, Manco Inca, a puppet ruler installed by the Spanish, escaped from Cusco and raised an army that besieged the city for months. The siege nearly succeeded, but Spanish reinforcements arrived and Manco Inca was forced to retreat into the jungle, to the remote region of Vilcabamba, where he established a neo-Inca state that would resist Spanish rule for another 36 years. The last Inca, Tupac Amaru, was captured by the Spanish in 1572 and publicly executed in the main square of Cusco. Tens of thousands of indigenous people watched. Many wept. It was the end. The Inca dynasty that had ruled for more than a century, that had built Cusco and Sacsayhuaman and Machu Picchu, was extinguished. The Spanish had steel and horses and guns and diseases, and the Inca world crumbled before them like a terrace wall undermined by rain. And Machu Picchu, what happened to the city above the clouds? The honest answer is, we do not know for certain. The archaeological evidence suggests that Machu Picchu was abandoned sometime in the mid-16th century, perhaps around 1540, perhaps a little later. The population simply left. They took their portable belongings, their textiles, their gold and silver, their tools and weapons. They left behind the stone buildings and the terraces and the fountains and the Intihuatana Stone, and the forest began to grow back. Why did they leave? Several theories have been proposed. The most likely explanation is that the estate lost its purpose. Machu Picchu was a royal estate of Pachacuti. When Pachacuti died, the estate continued to be maintained by his descendants and retainers, but the Spanish conquest disrupted the entire system of Inca governance. The royal estates lost their political function. The road system deteriorated. The reciprocal labor obligations that had provided the workforce for maintaining places like Machu Picchu collapsed. The population may also have been reduced by disease. Smallpox and other European diseases devastated Inca communities throughout the 16th century, sometimes killing 50% or more of the population in affected areas. A small estate like Machu Picchu, dependent on a steady supply of labor and provisions from the surrounding region, would have been particularly vulnerable to such disruption. There is another theory that deserves mention. Some scholars have suggested that the water supply at Machu Picchu may have been disrupted by a landslide or an earthquake, making the site uninhabitable. The spring that fed the city's water system was vulnerable to geological disturbance, and the loss of the water supply would have been catastrophic for a settlement that depended on it for drinking, cooking, agriculture, and ceremony. Others have suggested that Machu Picchu may have been deliberately abandoned as part of a strategic withdrawal into the jungle during the early years of the Spanish Conquest. The Neo-Inca state, the resistance government led first by Manco Inca and then by his successors, retreated from Cusco into the Vilcabamba region, deeper in the jungle to the north. It is possible that the population of Machu Picchu joined this retreat, leaving the estate to the forest and the mountain spirits. The truth may be a combination of all these factors: disease reducing the population, political upheaval removing the institutional support, disruption of the road network and supply lines, and perhaps the simple recognition that the world had changed, that the Inca system that had given birth to Machu Picchu was dying, and that there was no longer any reason to maintain a royal estate for a dynasty that no longer ruled. Whatever the reason, the city was abandoned, and then something remarkable happened. The jungle grew over it. The cloud forest, patient and persistent, sent its roots into the stonework and its canopy over the walls and its moss over the carved surfaces. Within a few generations, Machu Picchu had vanished beneath the green. The Spanish never found it. This is the crucial fact. Despite their thorough conquest of the Inca Empire, Despite their systematic destruction of Inca religious sites, despite their obsessive search for gold and silver, the Spanish never discovered Machu Picchu. The city was too remote, too hidden in its cloud forest, too far from the main roads and population centers. It slept undiscovered while empires rose and fell in the world below. For nearly 400 years, Machu Picchu slept. The forest grew thicker, the terraces crumbled at the edges, trees took root in the plazas, birds nested in the temples, moss covered the Intihuatana Stone, the fountains ran dry or ran wild, water finding its own paths through the ruins, the mountains stood watch, the clouds drifted through, and the city dreamed. It was not entirely unknown. Local farmers in the Urubamba Valley knew about ruins on the ridge above the river. A few explorers and prospectors may have visited. There are names and dates scratched into stones that suggest 19th century visitors, but the wider world knew nothing of it. That changed on the 24th of July, 1911. Hiram Bingham, III, was a lecturer in Latin American history at Yale University. He was tall, handsome, wealthy, the son and grandson of Protestant missionaries to Hawaii. He had a taste for adventure and a gift for self-promotion that would serve him well in the years to come. In 1911, Bingham organized an expedition to Peru with the stated goal of finding Vilcabamba, the lost city of the last Inca. Vilcabamba was the refuge of the Neo-Inca state that had resisted Spanish rule for decades after the conquest, and its location was one of the enduring mysteries of Andean archaeology. Bingham traveled through the Urubamba Valley with a small team, asking local people about ruins. On the 23rd of July, he camped near a farm by the river. A local farmer named Melchor Artiga told him about ruins on the ridge above, on a place called Machu Picchu. Bingham was not particularly excited. He had heard stories about ruins throughout his journey, and most had turned out to be minor sites of little interest. The next morning, the 24th of July, Artiga led Bingham up the mountain. The climb was steep and difficult, through dense forest and along slippery paths. Bingham later wrote that he was crawling on hands and knees in places. Artiga gave up partway and sent a boy ahead to guide the American the rest of the way. And then, emerging from the forest onto the ridge, Bingham saw the ruins, terraces covered in vegetation, stone walls half hidden by trees, the curve of the Temple of the Sun, the massive stones of the principal temple, the Intihuatana Stone standing free above the forest canopy. Bingham was astonished. He later wrote, with characteristic understatement, that the ruins were a veritable wonderland. He took photographs, he made notes, he explored what he could reach through the dense vegetation, and then he returned to the valley, already planning to come back with a larger expedition. He was not the first outsider to see Machu Picchu, but he was the first to publicize it to the world, and that made all the difference. The question of discovery is complicated. Bingham presented himself as the discoverer of Machu Picchu, and for many decades, the story was told as a simple narrative of exploration and revelation. The brave American explorer, guided by a local farmer, stumbles upon a lost city in the jungle. It is a good story. It makes for good headlines and good photographs and good lectures. But the truth is more nuanced. Local people had always known about the ruins. Artiga was farming on the terraces below the ridge. Other families had cleared sections of the ruins and were using them. A Peruvian landowner named Agustin Lizarraga had scratched his name and the date 1892, on one of the walls. German engineer Augusto Burns may have visited in the 1860s. In recent decades, Peruvian scholars and public figures have pushed back against the narrative of Bingham as discoverer. The ruins were never truly lost. They argue they were always known to the people who lived nearby. What Bingham discovered was not Machu Picchu itself, but rather its significance to the outside world. He was the one who published the photographs and wrote the articles and brought the archaeological teams that documented the site and made it famous. This is an important distinction, and it matters because the story of who discovered what and how shapes how we think about the relationship between local knowledge and external recognition. The people of the Urubamba Valley had been living with Machu Picchu for centuries. Bingham arrived, took photographs, removed artifacts, and received the credit. It is a pattern that repeats throughout the history of archaeology and exploration. Bingham returned to Machu Picchu in 1912 with a larger expedition funded by Yale University and the National Geographic Society. The team cleared the vegetation that had overgrown the ruins, revealing the full extent of the city for the first time in centuries. They mapped the site, they excavated, they photographed everything, and they removed thousands of artifacts, ceramics, bronze objects, stone tools, bones, which were shipped back to Yale. The National Geographic magazine published Bingham's account in 1913, with stunning photographs of the newly cleared ruins against their mountain backdrop. The article caused a sensation. Machu Picchu became one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world almost overnight. Bingham went on to have a remarkable career. He served as a United States Senator from Connecticut. He was the model for the movie character Indiana Jones, or so the story goes, though the connection is disputed. He wrote extensively about his explorations, and he spent the rest of his life believing that Machu Picchu was Vilcabamba, the last Inca capital. He was wrong about this, but his error does not diminish the importance of what he did. He brought Machu Picchu to the attention of the world, and in doing so, he ensured its preservation. The artifacts taken to Yale remained there for nearly a century. Peru repeatedly asked for their return. In 2007, Yale agreed to return the artifacts, and they were finally shipped back to Peru in 2011, exactly 100 years after Bingham's visit. A museum in Cusco now houses the collection. And the story of the artifacts' century-long sojourn in Connecticut has become part of the larger conversation about cultural patrimony and the obligations of institutions to the communities whose heritage they study. What was Machu Picchu? This seems like a simple question, but scholars have debated it for more than a century, and the answer has changed over time. Bingham believed he had found Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Inca. He also proposed that Machu Picchu might be Tampu-Tioco, the origin place of the Inca. Both identifications were wrong. Vilcabamba was later found at a different site called Espiritu Pampa, deeper in the jungle and far less well preserved than Machu Picchu. The current scholarly consensus, based on decades of archaeological and historical research, is that Machu Picchu was a royal estate built by and for Pachacuti, the 9th Inca. This interpretation was first proposed by the American historian John Hemming and the archaeologist John Rowe in the 1960s and 70s, and it has been supported by subsequent research. A royal estate in the Inca system was not simply a country house. It was a working landscape, a place of agricultural production, of religious ceremony, of political display. The Inca came here with his court, and his presence transformed the estate into a temporary capital. Ceremonies were performed, alliances were affirmed, the mountain spirits were honored. The permanent population was small, perhaps a few hundred people, but when the Inca visited, the population swelled. Servants, administrators, priests, soldiers, artisans, all would have accompanied the ruler. The estate had to be able to accommodate this influx, and the architecture reflects this. There are large communal spaces for gatherings. There are storerooms for food and drink. There are facilities for the preparation of chicha, the fermented maize beer that was central to Inca ceremonial life. Let us pause here for a moment. Let the story settle. Close your eyes if they are not already closed, and imagine Machu Picchu as it might have been in the time of Pachacuti. It is dawn. The sun has not yet risen above the eastern mountains, but the sky is lightening from black to deep blue to the pale gold of early morning. Mist fills the valley below the ridge, a white ocean stretching to the horizon. The peaks of distant mountains rise above the mist like islands. The city is waking. Smoke rises from cooking fires in the residential compounds. Women are grinding maize on stone mortars. Men are carrying water from the fountains in ceramic jugs. Children are running along the terraces. Llamas are bleating in their enclosures. In the temple district, priests are preparing for the morning ceremony. Coca leaves are being arranged on a stone altar. A fire of fragrant wood is being lit. The Intihuatana Stone, clean and polished, stands ready to receive the first light of the sun. And somewhere in the royal compound, in a room with fine stonework and views of the surrounding mountains, the Inca is waking. Servants attend him. His clothes are laid out, fine textiles woven from vicuña wool, the softest and most precious fiber in the Andes. He rises, he faces the east, and he waits for the sun. The first ray of sunlight touches the peak of Huayna Picchu. Then it slides down the mountain, illuminating the stone terraces one by one, turning the gray granite golden. It reaches the Temple of the Sun, enters through the solstice window, and strikes the carved stone within. The city is awake. The sun has returned. Another day begins in the city above the clouds. The great festivals of the Inca calendar would have transformed Machu Picchu. The most important was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, held at the winter solstice in June. For the Inca, the winter solstice was a time of anxiety. The sun was at its weakest. The days were at their shortest. The cold bit deepest. There was a fear, perhaps symbolic, perhaps genuine, that the sun might continue to weaken and never return. At Inti Raymi, the priests performed ceremonies to call the sun back. Fires were lit. Offerings of coca and chicha and food were made. Llamas were sacrificed, their organs examined for omens. The Inca himself, the son of the sun, led the rituals. He stood at the Intihuatana and performed the symbolic act of hitching the sun to the stone post, binding it to the earth, preventing it from falling further into the abyss of winter. At Machu Picchu, Inti Raymi would have been particularly dramatic. The Temple of the Sun is aligned precisely to the winter solstice sunrise. On that one morning of the year, the first light of the rising sun enters through the trapezed window and falls on a specific point on the carved stone inside. It is an architectural calendar, built in stone and light, and it marks the turning point of the year with absolute precision. Other festivals marked the agricultural calendar, the planting season, the harvest, the first rains, the appearance of the Pleiades above the eastern horizon. which signaled the beginning of the agricultural year. Each festival involved feasting, drinking chicha, dancing, and the renewal of reciprocal bonds between the people and the earth and the gods. The chicha was important. It was brewed from fermented maize by the Akla, the chosen women, and it was consumed in enormous quantities during festivals. The Inca understood that shared drinking created social bonds. The act of the Inca personally offering chicha to a visiting lord was a powerful political gesture. It established a relationship of reciprocity and obligation that was as binding as any written treaty. At Machu Picchu, large ceramic vessels for brewing and storing chicha have been found in the archaeological record, evidence of the feasts that once animated these quiet stone rooms. The sky above Machu Picchu is extraordinary. At this altitude, with so little light pollution, the night sky is a vast dome of stars. The Inca saw constellations in the dark spaces between the stars as well as in the bright stars themselves. They saw a llama in the dark rift of the Milky Way. They saw a fox, a toad, a serpent. These dark cloud constellations, as they are called, were just as important to Inca cosmology as the bright star patterns. The Milky Way itself, which the Inca called Mayu, the celestial river, was seen as a mirror of the earthly rivers below, just as the Urubamba River flowed through the valley at the foot of Machu Picchu. The celestial river flowed across the sky above. The correspondence between earth and sky was fundamental to Inca thought. What happened above was reflected below. What happened below was reflected above. Machu Picchu was designed to participate in this cosmic conversation. The alignment of the Temple of the Sun with the winter solstice sunrise, the orientation of the Intihuatana Stone to the cardinal directions, the positioning of the Temple of the Three Windows to catch the equinox sunrise. These were not decorative choices. They were acts of connection, binding the city to the rhythms of the sky. The workers who built Machu Picchu were not slaves. This is an important point. The Inca labor system, called mita, was a form of labor tax. Every community in the empire owed a certain amount of labor to the Inca state. Men would be called up for specific projects: road building, agricultural work, military service, construction, and they would serve for a defined period before returning to their communities. In exchange, the state provided food, drink, clothing, and raw materials during the work period. It was a system of reciprocity. The Inca provided for his people provided labor in return. This was the fundamental compact that held the empire together, and it was taken very seriously. The Inca was expected to be generous. Lavish feasts were held for workers. Chicha flowed freely. The work was hard, but the compensation was understood and accepted. The construction workers at Machu Picchu would have included specialists, master stonemasons from Cusco and other major centers, as well as general laborers drawn from local communities under the mita system. The quality of the stonework tells us that the finest masons in the empire worked here. The temples and royal buildings at Machu Picchu are among the best examples of Inca masonry anywhere. The terraces that surround the city served multiple purposes beyond agriculture. Recent research has shown that the terraces also functioned as a laboratory. The Inca used the different microclimates created by the terraces, different altitudes, different exposures to sun and wind, to experiment with crop varieties. A terrace on a south-facing slope at one altitude might receive very different conditions from a terrace on a north-facing slope 100 meters higher. By planting the same crop in different locations, The Inca could observe how it performed under different conditions and select the best varieties for wider cultivation. This was sophisticated applied science. The Inca may not have had a written language or a formal scientific method in the European sense, but they were acute observers of the natural world, and they developed agricultural techniques that sustained a large population at extreme altitudes for centuries. The potato, which the Inca cultivated in hundreds of varieties, was perhaps their greatest agricultural achievement. The technique of freeze-drying potatoes, exposing them to the cold night air at altitude, and then treading out the moisture during the day, produced a lightweight preserved food called chuño that could be stored for years. This technology allowed the Inca to build food reserves that sustained their armies during campaigns and their populations during lean years. The Spanish Conquest did not destroy everything. The Inca way of life persisted, transformed and diminished, but not extinguished. In the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, indigenous communities continued to speak Quechua, the language of the Inca. They continued to farm the same terraces. They continued to make offerings to the mountain spirits. They continued to weave textiles using traditional techniques passed down through generations. Quechua is still alive. It is spoken today by roughly 8 to 10 million people across Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and parts of Colombia and Argentina. It is the most widely spoken indigenous language in the Americas. The words we use in English for Inca things, condor, puma, coca, quinoa, llama, all come from Quechua. Even the word jerky, as in dried meat, comes from the Quechua word charqui. The language survived because the mountains survived. The high Andes were never fully colonized in the way that the lowlands were. Spanish settlers preferred the coast and the temperate valleys. The highland communities, remote and difficult to reach, preserved their language and their customs through 5 centuries of colonial rule and then through 2 centuries of republican independence. The grandchildren of the Inca speak the same language as their ancestors who built Machu Picchu. The words have evolved, as all languages evolve. But the sound of Quechua in a highland market or on a mountain trail is a living link to the world that created the city above the clouds. In Cusco today, you can hear Quechua spoken alongside Spanish in every market and every street. The descendants of the Inca sell woven textiles to tourists in the shadow of Spanish colonial churches built on Inca foundations. It is a layered world. Inca stone below, Spanish walls above, modern commerce on top, and the language of the Inca weaving through it all like a golden thread in a tapestry, unbroken, continuous, alive. Machu Picchu became a symbol, first a symbol of lost greatness, a monument to a civilization destroyed by European conquest, then a symbol of national pride, as Peru embraced its Inca heritage as a foundation of national identity, and finally, a symbol of universal human achievement, a place that speaks to something in all of us about the desire to build beauty in impossible places. The weaving tradition is worth pausing on. Inca textiles were among the most technically accomplished fabrics ever produced. They wove with cotton from the coast and with the wool of llamas, alpacas, and the wild vicuña, whose fleece is finer than cashmere and was reserved exclusively for the Inca himself. The most precious fabrics were cambay cloth, woven by specially trained women called akla, chosen women, who lived in religious institutions and devoted their lives to weaving and brewing chicha. A single piece of cambay cloth might contain more than 300 threads per centimeter and might take months to weave. The patterns encoded information about the wearer's rank, their community, their role in the empire, textiles were more valuable than gold in Inca society. They were given as diplomatic gifts. They were burned as offerings to the gods. They were wrapped around the mummified bodies of dead rulers. The Spanish were astonished by the quality of Inca weaving. And the tradition continues today in highland communities, where women still weave on backstrap looms using techniques that have changed little in 500 years. At Machu Picchu, the residential compounds would have been filled with textiles, blankets on the sleeping platforms, tapestries on the walls, woven bags for storing food and tools. None of these survived the centuries of abandonment and jungle growth. The stone remains, but the soft, warm, colorful fabric of daily life has vanished. When you walk through the ruins today, try to imagine the color. Try to imagine the walls hung with woven cloth in red and gold and brown and blue. Try to imagine the people wearing the finest textiles in the Americas, moving through these stone rooms and courtyards and staircases, their clothes bright against the gray granite and the green forest and the white clouds. Bingham's excavations uncovered more than 100 burials at Machu Picchu. Most were found in caves and rock shelters on the slopes below the city, not in the city itself. The Inca did not typically bury their dead within living spaces. The dead were placed in natural shelters, wrapped in textiles, accompanied by ceramic vessels and tools and food for the journey into the next world. Many of the burials at Machu Picchu were of women. This puzzled Bingham, and he proposed that Machu Picchu was a sanctuary of the Akla, the chosen women. Later research has corrected this interpretation. Modern analysis shows a more balanced population, but the burials tell us about the care the Inca took with their dead. The Inca believed that death was not an ending. It was a passage into another state of being. The dead remained part of the community. They were consulted for advice. They were included in festivals. The mummified bodies of dead rulers continued to hold property and wield influence through the living retainers who served them. This ancestor worship, this refusal to accept the finality of death, pervaded every aspect of Inca life. At Machu Picchu, the proximity of the dead to the living was part of the design. The caves below the city were not hidden or avoided. They were visited. Offerings were made. The boundary between the city of the living on the ridge and the resting places of the dead on the slopes below was a permeable one, and the living crossed it regularly. In 1983, Machu Picchu was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The citation praised its absolute masterpiece of architecture and its unique testimony to the Inca civilization. It was also designated a mixed site, recognized both for its cultural significance and for the natural beauty of its mountain setting. The modern visitor experience at Machu Picchu is both extraordinary and problematic. The site receives more than 1 million visitors a year. They arrive on trains from Cusco to the town of Aguascalientes at the foot of the mountain, and then ride buses up a switchback road to the entrance. The numbers are carefully controlled, but the sheer volume of visitors puts immense pressure on the fragile ruins. Erosion is a constant concern. Millions of feet walking over 500-year-old stone pathways wear them down. Rain and humidity cause damage. The weight of visitors on the terraces creates structural stress, and the infrastructure needed to support tourism, the trains, the buses, the hotels, the restaurants, the sewage systems, creates environmental pressures on the surrounding landscape. Peru has implemented various measures to manage the impact. Visitor numbers are capped. Certain areas are periodically closed for restoration. Timed entry tickets help spread the flow throughout the day. Professional guides are now mandatory. One-way routes through the site prevent bottlenecks. The Intihuatana Stone, which was damaged in 2000 when a crane being used for a beer commercial fell on it and chipped a corner, is now roped off so that visitors cannot touch it. Climate change adds another layer of threat. Warmer temperatures are causing glaciers in the high Andes to melt, altering rainfall patterns and increasing the risk of landslides. Machu Picchu sits on a steep ridge of fractured granite in one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. Landslides have always been a risk, but increasing rainfall intensity makes them more likely. In 2010, heavy rains caused flooding and landslides that destroyed sections of the railway to Aguas Calientes, stranding thousands of tourists and closing the site for weeks. The geological stability of the site itself is a concern. Some researchers have identified slow-moving faults beneath the ruins, and satellite monitoring has detected subtle movements in certain sections. The Inca built on bedrock wherever possible, and their drainage engineering was superb. But 500 years of neglect, followed by a century of heavy tourism, have taken their toll. Despite all this, Machu Picchu endures. The same qualities that made it an extraordinary feat of engineering in the 15th century, the deep foundations, the earthquake-resistant masonry, the sophisticated drainage, continue to protect it today. The Inca built to last, and they succeeded. But the fundamental tension remains. Machu Picchu's fame is both its greatest asset and its greatest threat. The more people who want to see it, the harder it is to preserve. The area around Machu Picchu is astonishingly biodiverse. The cloud forest that cloaks the mountains is one of the richest ecosystems on Earth, home to hundreds of species of orchids, more than 400 species of birds, spectacled bears, pumas, deer, and the elusive Andean cock of the rock, a brilliantly orange bird that performs elaborate mating dances on the forest floor. The transition from high Andean grassland to tropical cloud forest happens over a remarkably short distance, and the result is a mosaic of habitats that supports an extraordinary variety of life. The Inca were aware of this diversity, and they exploited it. The different altitude zones around Machu Picchu provided access to different resources. From the high grasslands came llama wool and potatoes. From the temperate valleys came maize and beans. From the cloud forest came timber and medicinal plants and exotic feathers for ceremonial use. From the jungle below came coca and tropical fruits and jaguar skins. This vertical economy, in which a single community might cultivate fields at 3 or 4 different altitudes, was one of the defining features of Andean civilization. The Inca did not merely adapt to the extreme geography of the Andes, they mastered it. They built a civilization that turned the vertical landscape into an advantage, accessing a wider range of resources than any settlement on flat ground could ever achieve. Some visitors come for the history, some come for the Instagram photograph, some come for the spiritual experience, some come because it is on a list of places you are supposed to see before you die, and some come simply because it is beautiful, and they want to stand in a place where human beings once built something extraordinary, something that has endured through centuries of neglect and jungle growth and earthquakes and rain, and is still standing. There is something else about Machu Picchu that is harder to put into words, something that has to do with the relationship between the built and the natural. between the shaped and the wild, between the human and the more than human. Most great buildings dominate their surroundings. A cathedral rises above its city. A palace commands its park. A skyscraper stands apart from the sky, but Machu Picchu does not dominate, it participates. It is part of its landscape in a way that very few human constructions have ever achieved. The walls of the temples are shaped from the same granite that forms the mountains around them. The terraces follow the contours of the ridge. The staircases climb where the rock allows them to climb. The fountains carry water from the mountain's own springs. The buildings are oriented to the sun and the stars. The whole city is a conversation between human intention and natural form, and neither partner in the conversation dominates the other. This is what visitors feel when they stand at the Sun Gate and look down at the city for the first time. It is not the size of the ruins that moves them. Machu Picchu is small compared to many archaeological sites. It is not the wealth. There is no gold or silver left. It is the rightness of it, the sense that this city belongs here, that it grew from this mountain, that the mountain and the city are one thing, inseparable, two aspects of the same reality. The Inca would have understood this feeling. They would have called it Aini, reciprocity. The mountain gives its stone. The builders give their skill. The sun gives its light. The terraces give their food. Everything is connected. Everything is in balance. Everything belongs. Huayna Picchu, the young peak, rises above the city to the north. It is the sharp green peak that you see in every photograph of Machu Picchu, standing behind the city like a sentinel. A steep stone stair, carved by the Inca into the near vertical rock face, climbs to the summit. At the top, there are more ruins, a small temple, and a view that takes in the entire spread of Machu Picchu below, the curving river, the surrounding mountains, and the cloud forest stretching to the horizon. The climb is not for the faint-hearted. The stairs are narrow and worn, and in places you are scrambling on hands and knees up near vertical rock with a drop of hundreds of meters on one side. But the reward at the top is extraordinary. You can see the entire layout of the city, the agricultural sector on the left, the urban sector on the right, the central plaza between them, the terraces stepping down the slopes like a giant staircase. From up here, the genius of the Inca planning is fully apparent. The city is not random, it is designed. Every building, every terrace, every stairway and fountain and retaining wall is part of a coherent whole. On the backside of Huayna Picchu, hidden from the main city, there is a cave complex that the Spanish-speaking guides call the Temple of the Moon. It is reached by a hair-raising path that descends the far side of the peak and then traverses a ledge above a sheer drop. Inside the cave, the Inca built walls and niches and carved thrones into the natural rock. The quality of the stonework is remarkable. Fine ashlar masonry fitted into the irregular shape of the cave with extraordinary skill. The purpose of this hidden temple is debated, but its location suggests that it was a place of particular sacredness, accessible only to those willing to make the difficult and dangerous climb. Let us return now to the darkness, to the quiet, to the mountain night. The visitors have gone. The buses have descended the switchback road. The trains have departed for Cusco. The town of Aguascalientes glows faintly in the valley far below, a scattering of lights beside the river. On the ridge, the city sleeps. The stone is cool. The fountains, some of them still running after 500 years, trickle softly in the darkness. The moss grows slowly on the walls. An owl calls from the forest edge. Somewhere below, in the river valley, a night bird answers. The clouds have settled below the ridge again. You are above them. The city is above them. The stars are above everything, countless and clear and ancient beyond all reckoning. Machu Picchu has been here for 500 years. The mountains that cradle it have been here for millions. The stars that shine above it have been burning for billions. And you, lying in the darkness, listening to the water and the wind and the distant call of birds, you are here for just this one brief moment, this one night, this one breath. But that is enough. It is always enough. One moment of attention, one breath of mountain air, one glimpse of a city above the clouds, built by people who believed that the mountains were alive and the sun could be hitched to a stone post, and the boundary between the human and the divine was thin enough to walk through. Let the clouds rise around you now. Let the mountain mist wrap you in gray and green and silence. Let the sounds of the city fade, the trickling water, the wind in the grass, the distant river. Let it all become quiet, become still. The stones of Machu Picchu are sleeping now. 500 years of sleeping. 500 years of rain and sun and frost and moss and the slow, patient growth of trees. 500 years of waiting. Waiting for what? Not for discovery. The city was never lost to those who lived nearby, not for fame. The city exists whether anyone photographs it or not for preservation. The city was built to last, and it has lasted, with or without UNESCO or entrance fees or guided tour. Perhaps the city is not waiting at all. Perhaps it is simply being stone, being mountain, being sky, being the place where the Inca stood at dawn and watched the sun rise over the eastern peaks and felt the warmth of the first light on his face and knew that the world was good. The world is good. Let yourself drift now. Let the altitude make you lightheaded and drowsy. Let the thin mountain air carry you towards sleep. You are safe here, high above the clouds, wrapped in the ancient stone, held by the mountain. The temperature is dropping now. The mountain night is cool, but not cold. The stone walls around you still hold some warmth from the afternoon sun. It seeps out slowly, radiating into the darkness like a memory of heat. Somewhere a stream is running over rock. The sound is so soft and so constant that it becomes part of the silence. It does not disturb the quiet. It is the quiet, water over stone, the oldest sound in the world. The sound the mountains have been making since long before anyone was here to listen. The moss on the walls is damp. If you reached out and touched it, your fingertips would come away cool and wet. The moss is alive. It grows so slowly that a single patch might take years to cover a stone, but it is patient. It has nothing but time. It was here before the tourists. It was here before the archaeologists. It was here before the forest grew over the ruins, and the ruins were forgotten by everyone except the farmers in the valley below. A moth flutters past in the darkness. Its wings make no sound. It is drawn to something you cannot see, some scent of night-blooming flower, some warmth from a crack in the rock. It disappears into the black air and is gone. The Southern Cross hangs low above the mountains. The Inca knew it well. They called it Chacana, the stair, or the bridge. It was a symbol of the three levels of existence, the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. The stars of the Southern Cross connected them, a cosmic stairway linking heaven and earth and the realm beneath the earth. You can see it now, 4 bright stars in the shape of a cross, tilted slightly, hanging above the dark shoulder of a mountain. It is the same sky the Inca saw, the same stars, the same silence. 500 years changes nothing about the sky. The constellations turn, the Milky Way arches overhead, the planets wander through their ancient paths, and the Southern Cross hangs where it has always hung, above the mountains, above the clouds, above the sleeping city. The Urubamba River is still flowing. It has been flowing for millions of years, cutting its way through the mountains, carving the valley deeper and deeper into the bedrock. It will keep flowing long after the last stone of Machu Picchu has crumbled to dust. But that will not happen tonight. Tonight the stones are strong. Tonight the terraces hold. Tonight the fountains run. Tonight the Intihuatana stands clear against the stars. Tomorrow the sun will rise. It will enter through the solstice window and touch the carved stone and warm the ancient walls. The clouds will lift from the valley. The mountains will emerge from the mist. And Machu Picchu will be there, as it has been, as it will be. A city above the clouds. Asleep now. The mountain is watching. It has been watching for millions of years. It watched the Inca build their city on its ridge. It watched the forest grow over the ruins. It watched the archaeologists come with their cameras and their notebooks. It watched the tourists come with their buses and their selfie sticks. It watches you now, and it will keep watching long after you are gone. The stars are keeping their ancient vigil. They do not hurry, they do not worry. They burn and they turn and they shine on the sleeping world below. The light that reaches your eyes tonight left those stars years ago, decades ago, centuries ago. You are seeing the past. You are always seeing the past. The present is just the place where all those ancient lights arrive. The water is singing its quiet song. Over stone and through moss and down the channels the Inca carved 500 years ago. The water does not know about the Inca. It does not know about the Spanish. It does not know about Bingham or Yale or UNESCO or the million visitors a year. It only knows gravity and stone. It only knows the way down, and it sings the same song it has always sung. And the stones, the patient stones, are holding everything together, each one fitted to its neighbor with a precision that defies explanation, each one bearing its share of the weight, each one doing exactly what it was shaped to do 5 centuries ago by hands that are dust now in a world that no longer exists. But the stones remain. The stones always remain. You are drifting now. The story is fading like the last light of sunset behind the western mountains. The details are blurring. The names and dates and facts are dissolving into something softer, something warmer, something that does not need to be remembered or understood. It just needs to be felt. The feeling of being high above the world, the feeling of being held by stone and mountain and sky, the feeling of being small, wonderfully small, in a landscape so vast and so ancient that your smallness is not diminishment but release. You do not need to be large here. You do not need to be important. You only need to breathe, to rest, to let go. The clouds are rising now, slowly, like a tide of white silk. They fill the valleys first, then rise up the slopes, then drift across the terraces, then settle over the plazas and the temples and the quiet stone rooms. Everything is soft, everything is muffled, everything is white and gray and gentle. You are inside the cloud now. You cannot see the mountains, you cannot see the stars, you cannot see the city. There is only the soft white light and the cool damp air and the distant sound of water, and you are floating, weightless, held. Good night. The mountain is sleeping. The city is sleeping. The stones are sleeping. And so are you. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams. If you enjoyed this, there are more stories waiting for you.